I recently made a video on writing in RPG life simulators, talking about what makes their writing unique over other types of game writing. In the conclusion of that video, I stated that most people would agree that the existence of writing in games like Stardew Valley, Graveyard Keeper, and Littlewood makes those games better. But I don't think this idea is a universal truth. I don't think RPG life simulators need writing at all. And while making that video, I kept thinking about one game, Forager, which does away with all those unnecessary and cumbersome words and instead focuses purely on game mechanics and satisfying progression systems. These two things are undoubtedly still at the core of most, if not all, good RPG life simulators, but Forager is stripped down to only have these elements. And not only do I think that this game is fine without any real story, world building, or characterization, I think the game would actually be worse if it included it. So let's discuss how Forager completely avoids the main three areas of writing we usually see in games like this: premise, rationalization, and world building. And let's talk about why avoiding these things is so important to the game's success and overall enjoyment. Premise writing is pretty simple. This is when the game gives you exposition about who the player is playing as, or who some of the other characters are and your relationship with them. It's also detailing what the world is like, what are the main mechanics of the game, and why you'd want or need to engage with them. You're a random dude transported into a fantasy realm and made to become a graveyard keeper in order to return home. Cool. Most RPG life simulators have an intro cutscene with a tutorial that explains the world and the premise to the player, helping situate them in the world and letting them get a grip on what's going on. Forager doesn't give a shit about any of that. You press new game and blammo, you just exist on this weird square island thingy playing as an androgynous nondescript humanoid person. More so though, Forager never begins to explain who you are, where are you from, what is the goal of the game, and this is great. The gameplay is completely forefronted and you are just straight into it. And honestly, the game doesn't really need to explain anything, because Forager is obviously made by someone who really loves the genre. This game has a lot of influences from some of the best games of its kind, and in turn, many of the mechanics will be familiar to the player if they're familiar with the genre. The expectation is that you understand the premise of the game intuitively. It's an RPG life simulator, and you're going to build up a town and grow as a character. You know the premise of the game because you bought the game, and the game just trusts that you'll be fine. So when the game boots up and you see some rocks on the ground and your toolbar down the bottom, you know, I bet the pickaxe breaks those stones, which will give me resources. And guess what? You'd be right. The game never says, hey, welcome to Flowsville, you're the newest fleeble hoping to make a name for themselves by creating their own island world we call floaty places. Nice to meet you, flibbity ploop. I'm Flip Flop Flap, commissioner of floaty places, and I hope to see you rise through our fleeble corporation, Flibbleglomp, or some random shit like that. The premise of Forager is for the player to engage with fun game mechanics, and for you to be compelled forwards by some pretty clear progression systems while providing space for your own ingenuity and creativity. And this is the premise of many games, especially RPG life simulators. Forager just pulls down the veil and doesn't pretend there's anything more to it. A choice which is actually incredibly freeing for this game. As the second major area we witness writing is with rationalization. This is when the game gives an in-world explanation for why certain mechanics exist. Breaking rocks with a pickaxe is pretty basic and doesn't really need to be explained. However, these games will often have lots of unique mechanics, which they rather reasonably think they need to give an in-world rationale for. In Littlewood, there is a monster card game that you can play, but it's not like the game just exists and you can play it when you want. No, you can only play this game when you go to a specific game shop in the world. In this shop, you can compete against people and engage in tournaments, giving the game a reason to give you harder and harder opponents. All in all, rationalizing why this card game mechanic exists in the world and why you as a player are experiencing it with a nice linear and natural difficulty curve. Forager foregoes trying to justify anything in the game past it's a game and it's fun. Why are all the enemies in the game here? Where do they come from? What even are they? None of these questions are even attempted to be answered. They exist because the game wants to have combat, and there doesn't need to be a justification or even any sort of explanation of what they are. This idea can be seen most prevalently in the tech tree. Forager has the wildest tech tree I have ever seen. You have basic stuff like foraging, markets with a little bit of zhuzh and magic. But this game also has things like offshore drilling, capitalism, and locomotives. When I started playing this game, I would have put quite a bit of money to say that it didn't have fucking trains, but what a fool I am. This is incredibly freeing and beneficial for Forager because it means the game can just have whatever mechanics it wants. It can make the gameplay as fun as possible without needing to consider whether it makes sense in the world. The inventory management system is also massively benefited from this thinking, because after a few unlocks, items just teleport into your storage without you needing to put them there. This cuts out a commonly boring experience most of these games have, all because they're trying to keep a sense of realism, and teleporting items just isn't something they can rationalize. So then we have to spend so much time just fucking around putting items in chests. The game is filled with these sorts of seemingly disparate elements. You can create potions which give you all types of amazing buffs, like lightning that shoots out of your body. Completing various sections of the museum will give you unrelated but really strong perks. Finishing dungeons or completing puzzles will lead to a massive chest appearing, giving you an orb which permanently improves your character. And none of this is explained, it just exists to improve the game. Despite this though, unironically enough, it all sort of makes sense, because the world of Forager then becomes a massive sandboxy type dealio, and whenever a new, seemingly aberrant element is added, it works. Because sure, why not have mining Tesla coils that blow up rocks in the world? That's not any more out of place than anything else that goes on. This brings us to the last category most RPG life simulators dive into that Forager laughs at as it completely ignores it: world building. Forager doesn't world build. There is no history or law or society you are a part of. The world just exists as this floaty island thing. Unlocking new tiles and expanding out your island world is equally as strange and obtuse. You simply purchase the tile, then kablam, it exists with whatever special thing that tile has going on. Maybe it's a dungeon, maybe it's a puzzle, maybe there's even a person. And the existence of this person could easily trick you into believing that maybe we are gonna see some characterization. Maybe you can even build a relationship with this person. Maybe when you complete quests for them, bringing them the items they desire, you'll unlock special dialogue. But no, they just exist to have you give them items. The characterization you mostly get is from what they look like and the design of the island that they exist on. With that said, this guy has a full character arc, and it's 3 lines. There's a big rock he wants to break. You break it, his life goal is complete, and then he wonders what purpose he has. Because on a meta level, he only existed to give you the hint that you need to break the rock. So once you do that, he doesn't have any purpose in the game. Once again, Forager is better off by not having any characterization for these NPCs, or a relationship, or any lore to learn. The entire game is primed around you getting to use the mechanics, and any tedious plot or story or character arcs is gonna slow us down. And rather cynically, as we all know, even when these elements do exist in games, most people just blast through them anyway, even when the writing is considered top quality. And while I was playing, I would occasionally wonder what the deal with the world is, or what a specific person was doing here. But the game's disinterest in diving into these areas gives you the answer. They are a game mechanic. They simply exist to perform in-game functions. And this is true of all these games, even if they may attempt to give these characters an arc or personalities. They only really exist as game mechanics. Forager is just dropping the veneer completely and pointing at their NPCs and saying they are a game mechanic, and that's it. All in all, I think Forager is a fascinating counterpoint to other games of its genre. Now, I'm certainly not saying games need to do with all this pesky writing and just focus on game mechanics and progression systems. No, not at all. I just think Forager is an interesting subversion away from what we've come to expect from RPG life simulators. While I was making the other video on what sort of writing we see in these games and why it's important, I kept thinking about how Forager doesn't do any of these things I was describing. And basically, I wanted to investigate why I think its design decision is for the best and why it helps Forager be such a good game. And that's the video. If you had literally any thoughts at all when watching it, then you're legally obligated to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you breathed more than 4 times throughout the course of the video, then it's medically suggested you check out some of my other content. And with that, thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye.